Hi, everybody. How are you? Well, I can say, Sandra, that you draw quite a crowd to be able to pull people out of the beautiful sunlight of South Florida to do this. We really appreciate your being here. We've just gotten to know each other through the process of her book. Her publisher, or maybe you, I don't know, but they sent me an advance copy of the book. So for, I don't know, 6, 8 months, I've had the pleasure of having this book. Now I'm getting my hardcover copy as well. It's an incredible book, and I mean this very sincerely. What Sandra has done is she has fused the notions, the realities, the histories, and most, I think, probably effectively of all, the flavors of the American South and the Latin kitchen, which she's going to demonstrate for us here today. And I know that you're going to want to get the book and then go home and try these recipes out yourself. So we're very, very pleased to welcome you to MCI and into our test kitchens here. And I know that she's a veteran of many, many cooking classes, and so questions are welcome.
This movement had not spread throughout the rest of the South. It had remained hermetically sealed. The southern region was developing its own cuisine, and even the cuisines of the South were not really known outside of the southern region. What's happened in the last 50 years in the South is people have really become proud of Southern food. Southerners have become proud of their own food. And in the past decade, just a huge movement of Latinos have moved into the South. So what you see now in Florida as a set cuisine, your Nuevo Latino cuisine, of course, that Norman coined, is something that had not happened anywhere else. It is not a movement that is Mexican-centric either, the way that it would be in the Southwest, your Tex-Mex cuisine, where one cuisine from Latin America, the Mexican cuisine, predominates. And I say that because I need to start by telling you there are 21 different countries in Latin America, and each single one of them cooks in a completely different way. So at least 21 different cuisines in Latin America. You may be very familiar with that here in Florida. People in LA are familiar with that. But in the South, when you go to Mississippi, where you go to Nashville, Tennessee, wherever you go, people still assume that everybody in Latin America eats Mexican food. And it's something that we need, to teach. What's happened in the South in the past 2 decades, it's that peoples from all 21 Latin countries have moved into the southern region. And throughout my research, once I started seeing how the two cuisines were melding together, I realized it is not a controlled fusion, and it's not something that started in restaurants. It's something that started with the people. Very organic movement. And the reason is very clear. There are 3 big similarities that we have in common in Latin America and in the American South. The first one is that the 3 same ethnic groups form the basis of our cuisines. All of them. The South, all of Latin America. That differentiates us from the rest of the country, North America, and Canada, of course. The 3 ethnic groups were, of course, the indigenous peoples of the Americas, different groups in different areas, Aztecs, Mayans, Incas, Taínos, Native Americans here, etc. The Europeans who came and discovered the New World, and how they discovered new ingredients here, and how they brought new ingredients to the New World from their world. And then the Africans. A very much ignored fact in cuisine is that the Africans have a huge influence and have left an indelible mark in the food of all of this territory. Granted, modern history will bring a lot of other cultures, the Italians to Argentina, the Germans to Chile, etc. But these 3 elements we have in common. The second thing we have in common is we share the same basket of ingredients, exactly the same. Corn, nuts, tomatoes, squash, chocolate, etc. And the third thing we have in common is we have the exact same culinary techniques: braising, roasting, deep frying, and of course barbecue. Now, living in North Carolina, it is a shock to North Carolinians that barbecue was not invented in the South. That barbacoa is actually a Latin American technique found by Christopher Columbus. It's a very ancient technique. The first culinary technique that Christopher Columbus found in the island of Hispaniola in what is today modern Dominican Republic, where the Taino Indians were making food over spits, cooking it over fire, and they were calling it barbacoa. And so the way to barbecue and the technique of barbecuing goes up into the South brought by the Europeans. And again, we see that melding of cultures that I was telling you about at the beginning. So why are these cuisines so different? Well, we interpret them in very different ways. The same basis, very different interpretations. But once you found both cuisines in the same territory, what happened is they started melding, they started adapting, and they started coming together. And it's not surprising when you're used to eating the same flavors and just interpreting them in different ways. A new cuisine is born. That's the way original Italian cuisine was also shaped. It's the way the history. So before I start cooking, I want to present you just with a little idea of what the world looked like before Christopher Columbus arrived and the New World met the Old World. The Spaniards come off their ships. They cannot see any cattle. They do not see any chicken. They do not see any pork. They do not see any of the animals they were used to eating. They don't see any of the plants they were used to eating. They didn't have any eggplants. There were no onions, nothing that they were used to eating. So they depended on the indigenous peoples that they found and that they colonized to teach them what to eat, what was poisonous, what was edible. Or otherwise, they would have either died or starved. Many died in the process of both things, starvation and poison. And by the same token, there's a whole new world of food that Christopher Columbus and all of the colonizers, the conquistadores, found here, including cocoa, tomatoes, chiles, squash, Thanksgiving turkey. Turkey is actually from this part of the world. So let me ask you, is that not the first fusion of the world? Because can you imagine Switzerland without chocolate? Or Italy without tomatoes? Or China and the Asian countries without chiles? And so you see, the South would not be the South without pork. Certainly Cuba wouldn't be Cuba without moros y cristianos. We had the beans, but there was no rice. And that is what I'm talking about. Now there's another progression of peoples into a new territory with similar ingredients, different techniques, and we're all having fun in each other's kitchens. And this is happening in a very real way. So while I talk to you a little bit more about the history, I'm going to start with the very first recipe, because I know you're hungry and you will all be much friendlier after I feed you. The first recipe I'm going to make is my pork tenderloin with cocoa, chile, and bourbon mole. And so this is my first, example of how these cuisines are coming together. So the first thing is pork tenderloin. Pork is huge in both cultures. The tenderloin already has been cleaned of silver skin for me. Silver skin is that little layer of fat at the tendon that you'll have on the top of the pork. It's important to remove it when you get it home. You'll see it. It's whitish. If you don't remove it, what happens when you cook the tenderloin is you've prepared this beautiful tenderloin and it'll curl up. And then you won't be able to slice it neatly. That's the only purpose for it, okay? And what we've done is we have pricked it with a knife, with a sharp knife, and then inserted pieces of garlic into it. This is to flavor the pork from the inside out, because pork can be very bland, just like chicken. So you just cut your garlic into slivers. I like to think of it as little almond slivers. And we just make little holes. You become very close and personal with your pork. And you just insert the little garlic cloves in it. See how simple that is? You can do this a couple of days ahead of time and leave this in your refrigerator with the oil, okay? And I'll tell you more about this step. The next thing I'm going to do is my spice rub, and I have some. This is Mexican cinnamon, what we call canela, okay? So it's a different cinnamon than what you're used to using, excuse me, in your hot cocoa. Here we use cassia cinnamon. It's hard. Cinnamon is the bark of a tree. Mexican cinnamon is from Ceylon. It's canela de Celaya, as we call it. It is actually a very long bark that you can actually get pieces way long, and it's very brittle. When you get it, play with it. Break a little piece of it. If you try to break a piece of cassia cinnamon, you will never be able to break it, okay? It's very important that I show you this now, because if you try to do this recipe with regular cinnamon, you're gonna have to buy new spice grinders, all of you, because you're going to bust the ones you have at home. So my spice mixture here is gonna be dark cocoa, some of this canela that I have ground. You grind it in your You can actually grind it in a little cheese grater, or you can grind it in your food processor, or a spice grinder, which is the way that I prefer. Some salt, a little bit of pepper, or a lot, and some sage. Here I'm using fresh sage, but feel free to use dried sage as well. In spice rubs, it really doesn't matter whether your herbs are dry or not. Sometimes it's even better if they're not, but I like the flavor of fresh sage. Just gonna chiffonar it a little bit. It's really important that you add flavor in food that you want to cook quickly. And if any of you have ever attempted to make a mole from scratch, you know it's a 2-day process. So there are many kinds of moles in Mexico and in Guatemala. Mole means mixture. That's all it means. So guacamole is an avocado mixture, right? So in this case, we're going to make a mole. Mole typically is a mixture of chiles, nuts, aromatics, sometimes tomatoes, sometimes not. And you make a paste of it. It's a very powerful flavor base and a paste. And it takes days and days and days to cook. When I taught a class in honor of Diana Kennedy, she actually allowed me to teach her own mole poblano recipe for the first time. She had never given anybody permission to do that before. And it took me 2 days to prepare mole for 50 people. I kid you not. It cooks and cooks and cooks and cooks and cooks. So when it came down to writing this book, and I wanted to include a mole recipe, I thought no one's ever going to do it if it's going to take them 2 days to do it. Because I'll be honest with you, I've made mole poblano maybe 5-6 times in my life. And I make it in huge batches, but I don't make it all the time. This is a recipe that you can do very quickly. All I'm going to do now is rub my pork tenderloin with this beautiful dark cocoa mixture. I'm going to go wash my hands again, but I want to show you what happens when you really rub something onto your pork, your spices. It's going to develop a beautifully dark color. It's important to rub it. Again, feel there's oil in your pork so that it will grab onto it. You want all the spices to go in there. If you don't, then you just coat it, and once you start cooking it, nothing has gone in deep into the meat, and you won't get that flavor that you want. So what I did here in this recipe is I deconstructed a mole. And you will see, the mole that I deconstructed here was the mole poblano. The mole poblano is the only mole, other than a Guatemalan mole that we use for plátanos, that has chocolate in it. So whenever you think of mole, the first thought in your mind is chocolate and chiles together. You're thinking automatically of poblano, which is probably the most famous mole of Oaxaca. But it's the only mole that has chocolate. There are many other moles that do not have any. There are moles in all different colors. Black moles, red moles, green moles. I mean, you'll find them in all different colors. So now that we have this, you can leave this again in your refrigerator for about 24 hours and forget about it. Why do I keep telling you that you can make things in advance? Well, because what I do is my book is include all of the little tips that will make cooking easy and practical for you. We all live very busy lives. We want to entertain, we want to have fun, but we don't want to be in the kitchen the whole time while our guests are there. And if we work, then we come home and we want to have a big party. It's very difficult to pull off a whole menu start to finish in time for the party. So what I give you are all these little tips that make your life more practical. So 24 hours ahead of time, you can go ahead and make this and forget about it. And now we're going to go and make the mole sauce. At this point, I'm just going to let it sit for a bit, and we're going to work on the mole. Back here, I've got some onions that I have caramelized. And caramelizing onions, people love to caramelize onions. They use them a lot. What caramelizing does is it really concentrates all of the natural sugars in the onions. And onions are members of the allium family. You have the leeks, you have the onions, you have the garlic, you have the shallots. The smaller they are, the more sugar content they have. So onions are pretty big. And even if you use vidalias, they're much larger than garlic, which is why garlic will burn so quickly if you just saute it, even for a few seconds. So when you're caramelizing onions and you want to develop flavor, you don't want to do this very quickly, or you'll burn your onions. So you always caramelize at around a medium heat and just let them slowly cook, happily get color, so you get that sweetness really coming out. You want caramelization, and that's what you're doing, and that's what I've done here. So after I caramelize my onions, I'm just going to throw in the garlic just for a few seconds. Now, if we were making a mole from scratch, you would have had to roast the onions, you would have had to roast the garlic, you would have had to roast everything else separately and toast everything separately, one thing at a time, the nuts and everything. And that's why the process drags on and drags on and drags on, especially if you're making mole for 50, because you're working with mounds of ingredients. So, it could take you 25 minutes just to toast your garlic the proper way. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of flavor. I'm not really going to caramelize them or anything in here. I am using butter to caramelize my onions. The reason I'm using butter in this recipe is that I need something to give body to my sauce once I blend it all together. That's it. That's all it takes. You can do this 24 hours ahead of time. Keep it in your refrigerator and forget about it. Okay? The next ingredient, and I'm going to pass one around. I don't have the other to pass around, but these are ancho chiles. We're using two different chiles in your mole here. We're using ancho chiles and guajillo chiles. Your ancho chiles are probably, they started as poblano peppers. If you've ever had a chile relleno, it's the big, large, green, purplish chile that looks like a flattened bell pepper, green bell pepper. And once they dry up, they dry them, they let them mature till they're red, and then they dry them and they collapse and they become ancho chiles. It's exactly the same chile. I'm gonna pass one around. Do not remove it from the bag. However, squeeze it, and then smell it. And you'll smell a raisiny chocolate aroma. It is probably the most fruity of all of the dried chiles. How do you buy chiles? You try to buy them still pliable. They're dried chiles, but we don't want them to be so dry that they are brittle. That way they're too old. So I'm just gonna quickly process my mole sauce so it can cook while I teach you the rest. And I'm gonna toast the chiles and show you how to do it and everything. So these are already toasted. Here are my chiles, my two guajillos. I have some chipotle peppers. Chipotle peppers, you buy them in cans. You can buy them dry also, but I like to use the ones that come in cans in an adobo sauce. Adobo sauce is a mixture of tomatoes, onions, vinegars. Depending which brand you buy, the ratio will vary. And this is a delicious adobo sauce. They're very, very spicy. Chipotle chiles are nothing other than smoked jalapenos. Again, they're allowed to ripen. And then they are smoked. And then they're stored in this way or dried. I'm going to add my seeds, the traditional element of moles. In this case, I'm adding pumpkin seeds or pepitas. These are very widely available. They're already out of its hull, so they're nice and green. You can eat them raw. In most moles, you would toast them ahead of time, but I will not do that here. It's not necessary. I will add some chicken broth, and I'll play that by ear, and my onions and my garlic. Okay. So when I was trying to meld the two cultures and include some Mexican elements and some Southern elements, I thought that I needed to add more depth of flavor into this mole by itself because, of course, I don't have all that method, that long methodology that gives it depth of flavor. So you'll see what my surprise ingredients are at the end. So for now, this is all I do, and I'm going to blend this. Please don't blend food while it's hot. Sorry. Don't blend food that is hot, please, unless you want to wear it. Because when food is very, very hot, it doesn't have room to expand, and the steam will actually expand. It will blow the top off, and you'll burn yourself. So whenever you blend something hot, don't fill your blender all the way up, and always cover it with a towel. Of course, if it's time to renovate your kitchen, feel free to just blow the top off, And I want you to look at this sauce right now and the color that it has, because it will be nothing like the end result. And you see the color, bright orange? It's almost like a pumpkin color sauce. Okay, this will be nothing like what we want at the end. All I'm going to do is pour it here. It won't look at all the way. It's going to look, you'll see. So I'm going to cook it down for a few minutes so that I can concentrate that flavor again. Get the idea. You'll get it all out of your blender when you're home. And again, do this at a low heat. This is going to continue to concentrate all of those flavors that were worked at. I'm going to add a little bit more chicken broth because it's a little thick. You have the exact recipe in the book. Everything's measured. I'm using only a portion of the recipe here. There we go. Thank you. The Guajillo chile is much longer and it's much more brittle. So I'm going to show you right now as we do that how to seed a chile, dried chile. I love scissors. To me, this is the best tool in my kitchen. And I like to cut a slit in the side of the chile and then open it up and open the chile up like a book. This is how I do it. Look at that. Most of the seeds will come out. In some mole recipes, you actually toast the seeds and use them too. So everybody thinks that the seeds of the chile is where all the capsaicin or the natural oils in the chiles that make them hot are located. But that's not true. The capsaicin is located and produced in the veins of the chile. The reason the seeds are hot is that they're attached to the veins. But if you deseed a chile and you do not remove the vein, you're still going to have very, very hot chiles. I use my hands. Many of you may use your hands as well, but make sure that you don't have a reaction to chiles, because if you do, your hands will burn. And please don't ever touch your ears or mouth or eyes or anything with your hands full of chile. So this is where the seeds are located. This one doesn't have a vein, a clear vein that I can show you. It has one. Let me see if I can remove part of it. Not really. There we go. That's the vein. That's where the seeds are located. Then all I do with my scissors is just remove the seed pod. When you're peeling a jalapeno, you're seeding and debating a jalapeno, you will also notice that if you remove all the pod, you won't have to worry about anything else being spicy. I want to burn this sauce here while I'm not watching it. Okay, at this point, my recipe calls for toasting all of your chiles. It's important for you to toast them. I'm going to use the same pan that I was using back here. You don't need to have any oil in a pan to toast the chile. And you're just going to toast your chiles for about 20 seconds per side. They don't need any more than that. These chiles are quite pliable, but if your chiles are still a little toastier than this, you're going to again get out all of those oils and they're going to soften for you. And all we want really is to toast them for about 20 seconds on each side to soften the chile so that you can blend it without breaking your blender, so that you can actually make it into a nice puree. Okay, so I'm going to sear my pork. You want to high heat. Searing is an important process. It's not really to keep the juices in, like everybody will tell you. It's not true. Searing doesn't prevent juices from coming out. But what it does is, again, it seals the flavor and it creates the caramelization that's going to add taste and flavor to your foods. Everything has sugar in it. We have sugar in it. That's why we're all so sweet sometimes. Some more than others. But protein has sugar in it too. So what we're trying to do is layer flavor over flavor over flavor. That's why when you stew, when you braise, it's important to get that caramelization process going first. In this case, we're not going to deglaze the pan, but we still want that process too. So here's my hot pan. And I know it's hot because I can see a little wisps of oil coming up. And I'm just going to brown that for about 4 minutes per side. You can also do this on the grill if you want to. Okay, if you prefer to do it. In fact, when I do large parties and I'm going to make this recipe, I will make vats of mole that I can keep warm. And put it on thermoses if you're going to be cooking outside and serving this outside. It'll keep warm in the thermos. And then just grill. We sometimes grill 40, 50 pork tenderloins at a time for big crowds. And it's just really easy to do, and your mole sauce stays warm and you can eat outdoors. Okay, see that color of the sear? You want that dark color. After 4 minutes on each side, all we're going to do is stick this in the oven for a few minutes until it's cooked to your liking. 140 degrees usually will give you medium. That's the way I like to eat my pork. 145, they say, is safe. So 140 plus, you have carryover cooking time for about 10 minutes after you cook it, and your temperature will come up. So any questions so far? So we've got that delicious mole sauce that's cooked there, and you're thinking, how is she going to make it look more like a mole sauce? Because it looks pretty orange, right? Okay. Remember I told you that depth of secret we were going to use? Southern bourbon, baby. Always remove the pot from the fire, especially if you have gas. That's the southern bit in it. As much as you want. The recipe is exact, but then I always say with bourbon, it's as much as you want. And then the other southern ingredient that I think was great for adding a lot of flavor to the recipe was molasses. Molasses will give you sweetness that you will typically get with raisins or prunes in a traditional mole. But it also gives you this concentrated flavor of sugar and almost a burnt flavor that the roasted vegetables give you in a mole. So I thought it would be a great idea to incorporate this instead of going through all that long process. And as if by magic, you'll see how this sauce is going to change color. And it will become more like the sauce you're used to seeing in a mole poblano. So I think Diana Kennedy will probably shoot me if she saw me doing this. I am in no way trying to make a replica of the mole poblano. I'm just teaching you a new Southern Latino mole here. See the color of the sauce now? And as that reduces now for a while, it will continue to getting dark and dark and dark. And that's that. We're going to let that sit for a while. And I want you to see how deep the sauce is. It takes 20 minutes to make versus a 2-day process. And you'll get a depth of flavor. Look at the dark color of the pork. You will see how the spices that we rubbed into the pork actually start permeating the pork. I think the colors look beautiful on a dish. I have other recipes in the book that I like to serve with this. I have a very delicious and easy carrot escabeche that I make with carrots. It's a beautiful orange, bright color, very easy to make as well. And then I like to serve this with my coconut rice, where you actually add desiccated coconut to the rice and coconut milk, some herbs, and you serve it all together, and it really creates a nice symphony of flavors. When you serve mole, you want to serve something to cut the spiciness of it, which is where your acids come in. So why I like to use an escabeche, something with acidity in it, or a nice salad. And then you also want to serve something that's pretty bland or neutral next to it so that you can use the sauce and absorb the flavors of the sauce. So a rice would be ideal. Tamales would be ideal, little tamalitos, small ones. Why not put it in an arepa too? You can do all sorts of combinations here with this. How is it? Who's tried it? Can you tell it only took 20 minutes to make that sauce? So when you're trying the mole, you should have some sweetness, you should have some depth of the bourbon, a hint of the bourbon, and you should also have a little bit of fruitiness from the chiles. You see how dark that sauce got after you cook it down? Okay, so now everybody can make mole, right? New Southern Latino mole at home. Okay, at the basis of cooking, I believe are very important to have what I call the basics. These are the recipes that, make people feel special when they come to you. So I created a whole chapter that collects all of the recipes that I think are at the basis of this cuisine and that offer you the basics to create a Southern Latino table, whether or not you are ready or willing to make the whole Southern Latino menu. So that includes the salsas, the biscuits, the achote oil, all the flavor bases that you're going to need, or the little accents to give you an idea of what the flavor of the Southern Latino table is. The other thing that it includes are those recipes that will make a frequent appearance throughout the book. The sauces that you can use for to dress different of the recipes, for example. So one of those basics in every person's kitchen should be a compound butter. Compound butters are a quick way to add a lot of flavor to your food. You don't have to worry about doing much to them. I always buy unsalted butter. Salted butter may look and appear, to taste better, but you have no control on how much salt you add to a recipe if you use salted butter, one. And two, do you all know that salted butter is older than fresh butter without salt in your refrigerator? That's why they sell more salted butter than unsalted butter, because they can keep it longer. So whenever you're buying unsalted butter, you're buying fresher butter. So if you're going to have butter, have the good stuff. So here we go. My butter is now malleable, and I'm going to make just a very simple compound butter. Compound butters have flavors. You can have herbs in here. You can have all sorts of spices. But I like to combine a little bit of sweetness. In this case, I'm adding honey. And any honey will do. We have wonderful honey in this country. Also, one of the great things that Spaniards brought to the Americas, we had no honeybees. I'm going to add some of the adobo sauce, and I'm actually going to chop my chipotle chile and added it to my butter. So when you buy chipotles in a can, see how it looks like a jalapeno if I turn it over? See that? When you buy chipotles in a can, you'll probably find that the smallest cans has about 8 of them. And you normally use half of one or one. They're very, very spicy. The reason being that because you've smoked them and dried them, they have collapsed. And remember, the walls now of the chile pepper that were, because jalapenos really in the Scoville unit measuring tool that we use are very, very low in that unit. They probably have like 500, I think, points in the Scoville unit. Very, very low, meaning that they're not that spicy compared to other peppers. And the rule of thumb typically is the smaller the chile is, and it's chile, not chili, right? The smaller that chile is, the hotter it'll be, because there's less room between the flesh of the pepper and the veins and the seed pod or the ovary of the chile, right? So when you dry a chile that is normally not spicy and the walls collapse, you're already causing that chile to become a little hotter. Then when you smoke it, and again you add a different chemical change to it, you're caramelizing, you're again developing all of the sugars in the pepper and also activating that capsaicin, and so it becomes much hotter. So that if you were to have a bite from a typical jalapeno and next to it have a bite from a chipotle, your ears will come out, okay? So when you use chipotles at home, though, how do you store them? Because I'm never going to use, cans of 20, 25 little chipotle peppers. So what I do at home, and I tell you all these tips in the book, is I get my chipotles and I do a series of things. I will actually put some on a baking sheet with a piece of parchment paper and put one chipotle and a dollop of adobo sauce on top. Keep on doing that throughout my baking sheet. Freeze them. Once they're solidly freeze them, you can pick up the chile with its sauce and stick them in a little baggie or plastic container. Whenever you need one, you just grab one. Or if you're lazier, like I am, you will go ahead and chop your entire can of chipotles the way I'm doing now, or process them and freeze them in little dollops, again in the same way that I just told you. And then when you need some, it's already been chopped for you. So all you do is get it out of the bag and stick it into your chili stew or into whatever you want, into your compound butter that you're going to make. And that's that. It's so easy to do. So please, normally recipes will offer you the option to seed and devein a chipotle. Don't waste your time. It's very hard to de-seed and devein a chipotle. If you don't want heat, then don't bother. It's a great way to add smokiness and spice to any recipe. Don't use melted butter for this either, because it's going to be such a mess. But once you have your compound butter mixed together, and I'm moving a lot here, but let me just open it. Parchment paper is different from wax paper. You all know that, right? If you've ever baked with parchment paper and then you've tried to switch to wax paper, one of two things have happened. Your parchment paper has either caught on, your wax paper has either caught on fire, or your food tastes like crayon. You will shape it into a log, wrap it, and chill it. Then when you need your compound butter, you just slice little pieces of it. You can also freeze these. So sometimes I'll make 4 or 5 different kinds of compound butter and I'll freeze them. There's nothing better than to come home tired at night. You slice your little piece of compound butter, grill a piece of fish, let that melt on top of your piece of fish, and you have a gourmet meal. Okay? But we're not going to use it on fish today. We're going to actually use this to put on our delicious biscuits. Because the South would not be the South without biscuits. And in the deep South, we love our biscuits. So self-rising flour, this is another very basic, easy recipe. This is something you can make in 10 minutes, and you should never be afraid of making biscuits. Self-rising flour, I believe I have about 2 cups here. And then pork rinds. This is the Latino influence in the Southern recipe. Southerners love pork rinds. They sell them in little baggies with barbecue sauce. Latinos, we love chicharrones. We eat them with lemon juice on top. We crumble them into salads. If you go to Nicaragua and you've had vigorón, which is a salad of yuca with cabbages and chicharrones on top. I mean, we use them all throughout Latin American cuisine. So why not put them in a biscuit? It didn't, I've always been surprised why no one ever put them in a biscuit. So I'm using my pork rinds just the way that I would use flour, just mixing them into self-rising flour. What is self-rising flour? In the South, we use a different flour than the rest of the country. Most of your flour is hard wheat. And ours, actually, in the South, the summer was too hot for the regular wheat to grow. And so we grow what's called soft winter wheat. And what that produces is a flour that has less gluten or less protein in it. So when you're making short recipes or shortbready recipes, meaning that you need them to rise and you don't need them to be too gluey or to have the molecular structure for it to like bread does, for you to knead it, then you want a soft flour. At the beginning, when you were making biscuits in the South, there wasn't any leavening. So biscuits were very, very tough. If you've ever heard of beaten biscuits, in fact, the very first biscuits were the beaten biscuits. They were made, thank you, they were made with hitting them with a mallet until you developed as much gluten as you possibly could because it naturally wasn't in the wheat. And you made this and then you had to crank them through a machine, almost like a cracker, and cut them out. And you made these very hard, small biscuits that didn't grow. They were actually quite flat. And those were typically served with ham. They were like the sweetback of the Europeans, the biscotti of the Italians. It was something that people could take around with them and it would last them for a very, very long time. Today, it's very difficult to find beaten biscuits. People don't make them anymore because they're hard to make and they're very labor intensive. Do you have a pastry cutter? Nope. Okay. Then here go my hot hands. Okay, and this is what you would do at home. I'm going to go ahead and break my biscuits with my hands while we talk. All I want here is to cut the lard. In this case, I'm using lard because what is a biscuit without lard? If you must, you can use butter. Stay away from vegetable shortening. I like lard. And we're using everything pork. But anyway, your beaten biscuits then were the preliminary biscuit in the South. And then, of course, came the invention of leavening. And we developed these new biscuits, really, that are the fluffy, beautiful biscuits that you see on every TV commercial around Thanksgiving and the holidays that come out of a can, but yours will come out of your kitchen. And see how I'm simply breaking the fat until it resembles, I think in my recipe it says small peas. That's all you want. Yeah, those are ready to serve. That would be great. You don't want to overwork it. See how quickly the process goes? Very simple. And I think after the new biscuits were made with the leavening became popular, very few people have gotten back to the beaten biscuit. I've had the luxury of having beaten biscuits a few times, and they're different. I like them. They're crunchy. I probably don't eat them the way a traditional Southerner would either. I'll probably just, eat them and dunk them into my pozole soup or something, and Southerners probably just cringe, but it works. Buttermilk, another Southern ingredient. Why is buttermilk so popular in the South? My book is filled with and I don't know, let's see, this is probably perfectly measured, but I'm going to see. When you add your buttermilk, this is when you really don't want to overwork your biscuits. I just want to get it wet enough. There we go. For it to come together. Buttermilk is a very important ingredient in the South because in the very hot weather, milk would curdle and it would go bad. Therefore, in the South, they could keep buttermilk on the counter for hours and days. That's why buttermilk is such an important ingredient and widely used in recipes in the South, from salad dressings to cakes to biscuits. Okay, so you saw me mix this together until it came together and only until it came together. In the book, I offer you the history of buttermilk. I offer you ingredient-based history in the book because it's important to know where our food comes from. But I also offer you a lot of cooking tips that are good for novice bakers. So if you're not familiar with making biscuits, and it took me many, many years to learn how to, these are the rules I was taught. So watch me as I do them. First, of course, is not to overwork the dough, which we just went through. You just saw me. But once you get here, if you've made biscuits at home and you're not a real biscuit maker, you get happy and you start playing with this and patting it and making sure it looks just right and it's the right height. Okay, biscuits are supposed to be informal. Did I just lose my... No, there we go. They're supposed to be informal food, okay? Ready? 30-second rule. Give it a pat. Give it another pat, and then you can either use a rolling pin or just flatten it out. They don't have to be perfect. At this point, you can make them any thickness you want. Okay, because if you like smaller biscuits, go ahead and make them a little smaller. I was making biscuits with Natalie Dupree in Chapel Hill 2 weeks ago. She actually cut them maybe an inch in size, and she served them as little hors d'oeuvres. So you can do whatever you want. So my recipe will work with any thickness that you want to give them. Okay, I give you a thickness in the book, and I give you a size for for biscuit cutters, but it will work with any size biscuit cutter that you want. Okay. So the first thing is 30 seconds. That's all I use to pat this down. Okay. Second rule is, please, when you cut down on a biscuit, don't ever twist your biscuit cutter. When you twist your biscuit cutter, what you're doing is you're sealing the edges of the biscuit. And what are biscuits supposed to do? Biscuits are supposed to rise. When you pinch the sides of the biscuit, well, you don't allow the biscuits to rise properly. Okay, so here we go. I'm just going to cut a few. No twisting, right? Flour between each biscuit. No twisting. I'm going to put that here so you all can see that. Can you see that there? Ready? And at first, it's hard not to twist. We all feel like that's like something we all miss, especially if you make a lot of cookies. You'll miss the twisting part. But believe me, don't twist. And then if you have a little bit of leftover dough, just pat it again together. You have hardly worked it, remember, okay? I'm just going to cut one more. Okay. The next trick with biscuits is, do you like them to have crisp edges all around, or do you like them to be soft? If you like them to have crisp edges all along, you separate them like I've done here and leave space between them. If you like them to be all fluffy and soft, then you just push them together and make them close together in your pan, okay? So that'll already create two different kinds of biscuits. The third secret, how many have I given you? I don't even remember. Okay, next secret. In order to help them rise again, we're always thinking about that. If you create a little, and I don't know why this works, but the Southern grandmothers who taught me swear by it and it works. If you create a little indentation at the top of the biscuit, it's just going to encourage the rest of it to grow into it. So with your knuckle or your thumb, just go ahead and make a small indentation at the top. Doesn't have to be big. See that? Just a little indentation. The next thing is, biscuits are normally brushed with butter or with some kind of fat to give them a nice sheen or a nice color. But if you let this drip to the sides of your biscuits, you're again going to prevent the sides from rising. So we will simply brush this cream, in this case I'm using cream, carefully so that it will not go to the sides. All I'm trying to give it here is color. So think of this as a little varnish for presentation at the end of your meal. You want the biscuits to look as appetizing as they look in those commercials. And at this point, your biscuits are ready to be baked. But stop, your guests are not coming until 3 hours from now. What am I going to do with hot biscuits? Well, you can go ahead and refrigerate these biscuits for up to 6 hours, my friends. Just cover them loosely with plastic and refrigerate them. Once your guests come in, you're going to go ahead and stick them directly into your oven and bake them to order. So when I have, again, very big parties, I will make trays of 1 to 100 biscuits, in the refrigerator. And as people are coming, I'm constantly baking. I have 2 sets of ovens. And I constantly bake so that there are always warm biscuits at the table. Because a biscuit must always, always be eaten hot, okay? So hopefully you'll get your biscuits next with some of the compound butter for you. Now, when you get your biscuits, the next rule of thumb is, I like that very much. Never, ever, ever cut your biscuits open with a knife. A real Southerner will split them with their fingers, okay? Think of it. Who here likes English muffins in the morning? And you've probably pricked them with a fork all around. You don't. You open them up. Well, if you you're supposed to open them up so that you create the little nooks and crannies so that when you put the butter on them, the butter has a place to go. It's the same thing with biscuits. If you slice the top off with a knife, you flatten that surface that you were so careful in building. Another trick for baking biscuits is you start with everything cold. Your flour should be cold, your lard should be cold, your fat should be cold, your buttermilk should be cold. Because if you are able to keep the lard cold for a longer period of time when those biscuits go into the oven, which is another reason why I like to chill them before I bake them, you delay the melting of that fat inside the biscuit. What you create is steam as the biscuit is baking, and that is what allows the flakiness to develop in a biscuit. If you want flaky biscuits, make sure your ingredients are cold and your biscuits go cold into a very hot oven. You bake biscuits between 450 degrees and 500 degrees because you want, again, that very, very quick searing on the outside and the melting of that from the inside out, of the fat from the inside out. How are those biscuits? Yeah, like them? Yes. You can hold them in a warmer like we just did, but not for long. I would say maybe half an hour. We held them at about 150 degrees. Most house ovens will not go that low. If you have a warming drawer, yeah, you can. I would say maybe half an hour to an hour maximum. But there's nothing better than a fresh biscuit. Would you all like to hear a small excerpt of the book? Yeah? So you can get an idea of what the rest of the book is about. So it looks like I'm going to be turning a lot of pages, but I promise you I'm not reading every single page. Born in the United States to Latin American parents, I moved at a young age with my family to Guatemala, my parents' homeland, and was instantly immersed in a world of melded cultures. My first words, I'm told, were in English, and I grew up as a student in the American school in the middle of Guatemala City. I learned the words of 2 national anthems, the pledges of allegiance to the U.S. flag and the Guatemalan flag, and the histories of 2 different cultures. Our school cafeteria was as likely to serve hamburgers and tuna salad one day as it was to offer milanesas and panes con frijol the next. Brownies and donuts shared the dessert counter with arroz con leche and buñuelos. Food at home was also a reflection of my fused reality. We ate tamales for special occasions, huevos rancheros for birthdays, and Carolina hot dogs every chance we got. We celebrated the Day of the Dead with fiambre, a salad composed of pickled vegetables, deli meats, pig's feet, sausages, cheese, and olives, and Thanksgiving with a turkey dinner that included all the trimmings. I spoke Spanish at home, English at school, and Spanglish with friends, and I still have a Latin accent today, as if I needed to tell you that. I was lucky enough to travel widely throughout the world, but I regularly spent summer vacations in the United States. I embraced my American home and at the same time nurtured my ethnic roots. Taught to be proud of my birthplace, I learned at an early age that my U.S. citizenship was an honor and a responsibility. I also learned at an early age that I have small ears, and that's why this headpiece keeps falling. I was in my teens when Civil War ravaged Guatemala, and I became aware that ownership of a U.S. passport meant hope for my entire family. If ever things get desperately dangerous, we could go back to the United States, my parents would tell me. And although at times it did become desperately dangerous, they remained in Guatemala. I, on the other hand, returned home to the United States. I had a wonderful college experience in the Northeast and then moved to the South where I experienced the joy of starting my family. When I first moved to Durham, North Carolina in the mid-'80s, I was a young bride eager to tackle cooking in my tiny pink kitchen. While shopping, I would often encounter both familiar and unfamiliar ingredients, and each day brought forth the discovery of a new dish. Hola, y'all became my family's motto. As my husband, who also hails from Guatemala, spent his days in graduate school at nearby Duke University, I experimented with newfound ingredients, substituting what I could to recreate the flavors of our youth spent in Guatemala. At first, I improvised with flavors, mixing ingredients until my foods resembled those I remembered from my childhood. I substituted finely ground cornmeal for masa and tinned chiles for fresh serranos. I became more ambitious and learned to make my own dulce de leche from scratch. After a few cans of boiling condensed milk blew up, I finally learned how to make it the safe way. My first tamales were wrapped in aluminum foil in lieu of corn husks. They were not like the ones we remembered, but they fed our nostalgia. By now, I've spent most of my life in the South. I've cooked with many fellow Southerners, eaten in their homes, invited them to my family table, exchanged recipes, learned to cook in their kitchens, and taught them how to cook. To put it simply, Southern food found my soul. I learned to respect the ingredients, cooking techniques of my new home, and I mastered the skills of handling biscuits lightly, just enough to help them rise. I discovered grits and fell in love with fried green tomatoes and pimento cheese. As my two worlds melded, so did the food in those worlds. The Latina discovered her Southern belle within, and it was magic for me. So thank you so much for coming today with me and sharing this special moment. Teaching here has been a highlight of my book tour. I really appreciate Norman's invitation and everybody here, Victoria, all of the volunteers, all of the chefs and sous chefs, everybody who's made it possible to prep, and all the emails that went back and forth in planning this class. I'm very, very grateful and very impressed with this incredible place that you have here in Miami. Truly, Miami was the place I used to come to vacation when I was a young girl. My parents had an apartment in Key Biscayne, so I spent many, many, many years here in Miami, and it's good to be back to this little piece of home for me. So thank you very much for having me.
This program is brought to you by Miami Culinary Institute at Miami-Dade College. For more information about the schools and the culinarium program, please visit www.miamidadeculinary.com or call 305-237-3276.